Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Mem Amud Beis 40b of Maseches Kiddushin. We're starting 2 lines from the bottom of the page, where the Gemara quotes the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said, Kol she'eino lo b'mikra v'lo b'mishnah. Anybody who doesn't have mikra, the knowledge of Torah, the written Torah, or knowledge of Mishnah, the oral Torah, the halacha, and the Mishnah actually said, v'lo b'derech eretz, and also doesn't have derech eretz, doesn't have proper conduct, respect amongst other people. So the Mishnah had said such a person is eino min hayishuv. They're not part of society. Such a person is not someone who really can be considered a part of society if they have no knowledge of Torah and also they have no midos, they don't have proper character. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan sagu pasol le'edus. They also are disqualified from testifying, from being witnesses. And Rashi explains, because such a person isn't someone who is part of society, so they don't really care what people think of them, and they don't have any busha, any embarrassment, and they'll say things whether they're true or not, without, unencumbered, because they don't have a place in society anyways. So such a person cannot testify. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, ha'ochel bashuk, somebody who eats in the marketplace, eats in public, walks around with a slice of pizza, hareza doma lekelev. Such a person is like a dog, the Gemara says. Again, it's lacking kavod for the individual, for their own self, for their own honor, for their own self-respect, to walk around eating in the shuk, in the marketplace, in public. So such a person, the Gemara says, is like a dog. V'yesh omrim pasaledus, and some say that that person is also pasaledus, also disqualified from testifying. And again, it has to do with the fact that they have no self-respect, so they're not scared or embarrassed to give a testimony that's not true, where they would lose their respect and disgrace themselves because they don't care about that. Amar Rav Yidi bar Avin says, halacha ki yesh omer. The halacha is like this yesh omer, like this opinion that says that one who eats in the marketplace is in fact disqualified from giving testimony. They don't have the rights, the necessary amount of self-respect to be able to be trusted in giving testimony. Darash bar kapara taught, ragzan lo osa biyado el ragzanusa. Someone who gets angry easily, all they have as a reward for their anger, as a result of their anger, is their anger. They don't gain anything. The way Rashi says it is that it weakens their flesh, it just wears them out, basically. But you don't gain anything from getting angry. Ula adam tov, but to a good person, mat imimosomi primaisav. He gets to taste from the fruits of his deeds. In other words, that we've talked about how there's reward in the next world, and for some things there's also reward in this world, but it doesn't take away from the keren, from the principle in the next world. That's what it means you taste from it. You get a little bit of it in this world, but it doesn't really take away from the principle in the next world. And this type of person that we talked about in the Mishnah, who doesn't have mikra, doesn't have any knowledge of the written Torah, and no knowledge of the oral Torah, and doesn't have derech eretz, doesn't have proper conduct amongst people, dar hana mimenu. The Gemara says you should take an oath that you won't take any benefit from such a person, which is really a means of separating from that person. You don't want to have anything to do with such a person. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in the first chapter of Tehillim, the first verse of Tehillim actually, it says Uvemoshav leitzim lo yashav. So it says, fortunate is the person who doesn't go in the ways of the wicked. And also it says, and doesn't sit amongst scorners. So a person, the Gemara says, Moshavo Moshav Leitzim. This type of person who doesn't learn anything and doesn't have respect for others. So what do? They sit around mocking things and expressing scorn about things. So that's a scorner. That's someone who you don't want to sit with. And therefore, the Gemara says that if there's such a person, you should do what you can to separate from them. And one way to do that is dar hana mimenu, is to take an oath not to benefit from them in any way. That way you won't have anything to do with them, and you won't be sitting amongst scorners. Hadron Allah Ha'isha Niknes. We will return to you to this chapter, Ha'isha Niknes. And now we're ready to start the second chapter, Ha'ish Mekadesh. So we're on Mem Aleph, Amar Aleph 41a. We're at the new parak, the new chapter, the second parak of Kiddushin. Says the Mishnah, Ha'ish Mekadesh, Bo Uvishlucho. So we're back to Kiddushin, back to topics of Kiddushin after running off on various tangents. We're back to Kiddushin, and it says that a man can be Mekadesh, can betroth his wife, either by himself, Bo, Uvishlucho, or with an agent. Ha'isha miskadeshes ba uvishlucha, and a woman can accept Kiddushin either by herself or with an agent. Ha'ish mekadesh es bito keshehi naira ba uvishlucha. A man can betroth his daughter if she is still a naira. Either he could do it himself or he can send an agent to do so on his behalf. But it's in his control, if he wants to betroth his daughter, as long as she is still a naira. A naira is when she's between 12 and 12 and a half. Once she reaches 12 and a half, she's a bogeres. She's now out of her father's domain, and he can no longer be mekadesher. But then she's on her own. But when she's a naira, he can accept Kiddushin, and certainly before that, he can also, when she's younger than that even, although that's going to be discussed in the Gemara, whether that's an okay thing to do, but it would work. He would be able to accept Kiddushin for his daughter even before 12 years old, and that's whether on his own or with a shliach, with an agent. The Gemara asks, Hashta b'shlucho mekadesh. The Mishnah says that you're allowed to be mekadesh. You're allowed to betroth a woman, sanctify her with a messenger. Bo mi bayit. Does it need to say that you can do it yourself also? Why doesn't the Mishnah just say you can sanctify with a messenger? And I would know that you can sanctify yourself with yourself, but on your own. Why does it have to say you or your messenger? So Rav Yosef said that's to teach you that mitzvah bo yoser mideshulcha, that it's a greater mitzvah for you to do it than for a shliach to do it. There's a mitzvah to get married, to betroth a woman. It's part of the mitzvah of pruv, procreating. And the mitzvah is on the individual. It's better for him to do it himself than to have a messenger do it. That's what it's teaching you. And this is a general rule with mitzvahs. Mitzvahs that can be done through an agent, it's always better to do it yourself. Always might be a strong word. It's generally better to do it yourself. Kiha de Rav Safra. Like we find by Rav Safra, machrich reisha. To prepare for Shabbos, Rav Safra, even though he could have had someone else do it, he would singe the head of the animal that they were having for Shabbos himself, because it's better for an individual to do the mitzvah rather than to have a shliach, to have an agent do it. Rava malach shibuta, and Rava salted this shibuta fish for Shabbos. Again, an expression of this idea that it's better to do something yourself than to have an agent do it. So that's how the Gemara addresses this question. Why does it say that a man could betroth a woman either himself or with a shliach? If he could do it with a shliach, with an agent, of course he could do it with himself. It's to bring out the idea that it's better for him to do it himself than with an agent. Ikka da'amri, but there are those who say, Beha isura nami ispa, that no, that to betroth a woman with a shliach is actually involves an isser, involves something prohibited, assuming the fact that the case would be where he hasn't yet seen that woman. If he's never seen her and he just sends a shliach to betroth her, so that can involve a prohibition. Kid Rav Yehuda Marav, like Rav Yehuda taught in the name of Rav, the Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Asur la'adam she'ikadesh es ha'isha ad sheyirena. It's forbidden for a man to betroth a woman until he sees her. Why? Shema yireba davar meguna v'tiskan ala. Because if he hasn't seen her before, and then he's all of a sudden betrothed to her, and then he sees her, he might find something that he doesn't like about her. And that's, you don't want that the husband has something that he doesn't like about the wife. Tiskana alav, that's not going to lead to good places. V'rachmana amar. And the Torah says, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you should love your fellow like yourself. And if he finds something that he doesn't like about her, then he's going to be in transgression of loving his fellow like himself. I think the idea is, if it's not his wife, so it doesn't matter that she has some kind of thing that bothers him, whether it's a physical trait or a personality trait, whatever it is, if it's not his wife, so he's not going to transgress the Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. He can deal with it. But if it's his wife, so that might bother him to the point that he transgresses this positive mitzvah to love your fellow like yourself, and he won't love her as much, and that's why it's a problem to betroth a woman without having seen her before. And I guess according to that, I think what the Gemara is saying is, and it's not just, why it says that he could do it himself or with the shliach? It's not simply that it's a greater mitzvah to do it himself, but in many cases you have to do it yourself, because otherwise, although it would work through a shliach, it would work through a messenger, through an agent, but you would be transgressing this teaching of Rav that you shouldn't do that you shouldn't betroth a woman without seeing her. So that's why it says, it makes sure to mention, he should do it himself. Or maybe under dire circumstances he could do it with an agent. And if that's true, V'chi itmar de Rav Yosef aseifa itmar. So the whole discussion that we had before about it's better to do it yourself than with a messenger was really talking about the second half of the Mishnah. As follows. Ha'isha miskadeshes ba b'shlucha. The next line of the Mishnah says that a woman can accept Kiddushin either herself or with an agent. And we asked the same kind of question. This time, instead of asking about the man being able to betroth himself or with an agent, we asked about the woman being able to accept Kiddushin either herself or with an agent. Hashta b'shlucha mikadsha. If she could accept Kiddushin with an agent, ba mibai doesn't need to say that she could do it herself. It could have just said that she can accept Kiddushin with an agent, and I would know that she could accept it herself. To that's where this whole discussion happened. To that, Amar Rav Yosef, mitzvah ba yoser mibishlucha. To that, Rav Yosef said, no, it's a greater mitzvah for her to do it herself than for her to do it with an agent. Ki ha de Rav Safra machrech reisha, like we find that Rav Safra, he would singe the head of the animal for Shabbos. Rava malach shibuta, Rava salted the fish himself, because it's better to do it yourself than to have an agent do it. Aval, however, biha isura lesba. But for her to accept Kiddushin without having seen the man, there's no isser, there's no prohibition. That's okay. Kid Reish Lakish, like in accordance with the teaching of Reish Lakish, Da'amar Reish Lakish, that Reish Lakish said, Tav l'mesav tandum l'mesav armala. It's better for a woman, or a woman says, I'd rather be living with two than living alone. And so a woman who, the Gemara is saying that the nature of women is that they really want to get married, even more than a man wants to get married, and therefore they're willing to overlook certain flaws more so than a man would, and they would be more accepting of it. So we're not concerned that if the man has a flaw that she's going to say, that she's going to transgress Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha and not love him as much, because she's willing to overlook those flaws because she's happy to be married. That's what the that's what the Gemara says. Now Rashi asks a question that either way it won't make a difference for her, because Rashi. Okay, let's leave that aside for now. Fine. So So the Gemara continues now and it quotes the Mishnah, and the Mishnah said, "Ha'ish mekadesh es bito kishi naira." A man can betroth his daughter when she's a naira, when she is 12 years old, between 12 and 12 and a half. Asks the Gemara, "Kishehi naira in kishi katana lo?" When she's a naira, he could accept Kiddushin for his daughter, but when she's younger than that, when she's a katana, he can't. Right? I already mentioned when we read the Mishnah that he could, but the Gemara is going through that discussion that he can't. So the Gemara says, "Misayeh le'lo Rav." This Mishnah would be a proof to the teaching of Rav. Da'amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, because Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. V'itema Rabbi Elazar. Some say it was Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rav. Asur la'adam she'yikadesh es bito k'shi katana. It's forbidden for a man to accept Kiddushin for his daughter when she is a child. Ad she'tigdal, until she becomes an adult, 12 years old. V'tomar, and she says, "Beploni ani rotze," I would like to be married to Ploni, to so-and-so. So although it may work for a father to accept Kiddushin for his daughter, but the Mishnah didn't mention that. The Mishnah only talks about accepting Kiddushin for a naira for once she reaches adulthood of 12 years old, because it's expressing, it's showing the teaching of Rav, or it's really, I guess, a proof to the teaching of Rav, that it's not proper, it's not correct, even though he could, but a father should not accept Kiddushin for his daughter before she is an adult, and she can say that I would like to be married to so-and-so, so that she should be able to enter the marriage willingly. Before she's 12 years old, she doesn't really have the intellect to be able to determine such things, so even if he would get her opinion, it wouldn't be worth as much, so he should wait till she's 12 years old, in which case we can have her agreement before entering her into a marriage. Okay. Now, in general, the Mishnah talks about the idea of agency, of shlichus, that a man could send a messenger to be mekadesh a woman could send a messenger to accept Kiddushin. Asks the Gemara, shlichus minalan, how do we know that agency works in the process of Kiddushin? So the Gemara says, D'Tanya, because we're learning a Mishnah. The Gemara quotes a pasuk. The verse is in the context of gerushin, of divorce. And the Mishnah, or really marriage and divorce, the pasuk says, when a man takes a woman, if she, and has relations with her, and then if she doesn't find favor in his eyes, because he finds some kind of ervas davar, some kind of disqualifying problem, so then v'kasav lo sefer krisus, he should write for her a book of divorce, basically a document of divorce, v'nasam biyada, and placing in your hand, v'shilacha mi beso, and send her from his house. So that's the word that we're going to focus on, send her from his house. So says the Gemara, now it chooses the root and send her, v'shilcha, when it could have said v'garsha, like gerushin means divorce, send away. That's also a Lashon HaKodesh Hebrew word. So it could have used the word to really garish means like to expel, which maybe would have been more appropriate over here than to send away. So why does it say to send her? So the shilach, by using that word, milamechu osa shliach, it's to teach you that he can send an agent to do so. It chooses a different word of sending to say that it could be, you can send someone to do it. You can send an agent to send her out. Now, the way that it says it though is not just the shilach, but it says the shalcha. And that teaches, even though there it's him sending her, the shilcha with a mapek, which means he's sending her, but it can also be read the shalcha, that she'll send. So therefore, melamed shiyos shliach, that teaches that she can make an agent. So he can make an agent and she can make an agent. Now not only that, but he repeats the same words in another pasuk, 2 verses later. Again, it talks about a similar case, and it says v'shilcha. So we have a second chance to make the same drushos, the same teachings. V'shilach v'shalcha, melamed shashliach osa shliach. So we find that even the messenger can make another messenger. If I appoint a messenger, so he can then appoint another messenger. You may have to make certain conditions, but in general, that's the case. Now, all that was talking about for divorce. Says the Gemara, Ashkechan begerushin. So we find that it works for gerushin, for divorce. Kiddushin minalan. How do we know that it even works for Kiddushin, for betrothal? How do we know that that verse was in the context of divorce? You can appoint a messenger, and she could appoint a messenger to receive the get, to receive the bill of divorce. But how do we know that that's true also by Kiddushin? B'Kiddushin, Ashkechan b'Gerushin, we find that it's true by divorce. B'Kiddushin minal. How do we know that by Kiddushin you can appoint a messenger, that the man can, that the woman could? B'Chitema diyalef mi'Gerushin, and if you'll tell me just to learn it from Gerushin, if it's true by divorce, it should be true by Kiddushin, by marriage. But I'll tell you, Malo Gerushin shekin yeshnan bal karcha. There's a difference though, that by Gerushin, by divorce, you can divorce her against her will. But, so, you can divorce her against her will, and you can also do it through a messenger. So there's more maybe more ways to do it. We see you can even do it against her will, so you can also do it another way, which is again with using a messenger. But by Kiddushin, we find that it's more limited. By Kiddushin, you cannot do it against her will, so maybe it's also limited in this way that you can't do it with a messenger. So to that, the Gemara says it's true. You can't just learn it logically, like if it's true by divorce, it should be true by marriage, because the logic may not follow necessarily. But Amarkra v'yatsa v'haisa. But we can learn it from the juxtaposition of the pasuk that juxtaposes, it puts right next to each other divorce and marriage. It says v'yatsa v'beso, she goes out from his house, v'haisa l'ishachar, and she marries another man. So we have divorce and marriage juxtaposed. Makish havaya liyatzia. That's to compare and to learn one from the other. Havaya, entering a marriage, from yitzia, from the leaving of a marriage. Then ma yitzia mishavi shliach. Just like we've established that when you send a woman out of a marriage, you can do it with an agent. So too, when a woman enters a marriage, when you bring a woman into a marriage, you can do it through a messenger. So that's how we know that Kiddushin can happen through a messenger. Asks the Gemara, but what about with regards to Truma? The Mishnah says, it's not, but that which we learn in the Mishnah, ha'omer lishlucha. If somebody says to a messenger, to an agent, say trom, go and separate out truma from my produce. Truma is, the Torah actually doesn't designate the specific amount that you have to separate, but you have to separate from your produce and give it to a Kohen. And if the messenger is sent by the owner to separate truma, torim kedas balabayis. He should separate the amount that the balabayis, that the owner would be interested in. So if he's a generous person, he should separate more generously. The recommended generous amount is a 1/40th. If he's more stingy, he should separate the more tight-fisted amount, which is 1/60th, which is less. V'im eino yodea das balabayis, but if he doesn't know what this owner would want, if he doesn't know what his perspective on these things are, if he's generous, if he's stingy, Turim bebeinanis, he should take the average amount, which is echad mechamishim, which is 1/50th, which is in the middle there. Now, piches asara, hosif asara, let's say he was off a bit, he added a tenth, or he took off a tenth. So then, truma so truma, it still works. Fine. So we have this concept here that there could be an agent to separate truma. Ask the Gemara Minalan, how do we know that there you can have agency when it comes to separating truma? Maybe the owner of the produce has to do it himself. V'chitema di'alef mi'gerushin, and if you'll tell me we learn it from divorce, that just like it works for divorce, to have an agent, it works for separating truma. But mala gerushin shekein yeshnan chol. But gerushin is chol. Gerushin involves the mundane, the non-holy. So, and truma is involving, this makes it sanctified. It's holy. Only a Kohen would be allowed to consume it. So maybe there's agency by the mundane, by the non-holy, but who says that also by truma, by something holy, consecrated, that it works? So the Gemara says, okay, we can't learn it from gerushin, we can't learn it from divorce, But we'll learn it from the following verse. Amar Kra, the pasuk says atem, it says you. Gam atem, it says also you. So by truma, it says Kein tarimu gam atem trumas Hashem. So too, you also should separate. So why does it say you also? That's extra. It should just say you should separate. Why is it saying you also? Lirabos es hashliach. That word also comes to include the shliach, that you, but also you meaning additional people as well, including an agent. So that's how we know that a person can separate truma by an agent. Okay, we will hold there. Once again, Mazel Tov on completing the first parak of Kiddushin, and looking forward to learning the second parak and completing that one as well. All the best.